Hey everyone, welcome to my talk, CBT versus Imposter Syndrome. So, I'm honored to be among the segment with a lot of folks who are talking about sort of like the non technical side of the tech world. And we're going to be continuing that in this talk and talking about cognitive behavioral therapy and how you can use it to deal with imposter syndrome, which is something we all kind of face throughout our career, as well as how to use it to build and how technically I've used it to build a framework for myself that's helped with things like job interviews, as well as performance and promotion reviews. So, first of all, who am I? Who are you actually talking to? My name is Rahat Chowdhury, and I am a software engineer, a co-founder of a mental health startup called Whimser. And I'm a generally a mental health advocate. I love doing talks like this at tech conferences, talking about mental health and well-being for folks in our industry. We don't talk about this a lot. We don't always bring this up, and I'm hoping that that conversation kind of changes as we start to bring this about in a way that allows for companies to put the mental well-being of their employees first. A lot of what I'm going to be talking about today is based on what we work on at Whimser. A lot of this is based on the products that we do work on, and hopefully you'll take something out of this that'll be helpful for your career or for your own just general mental well-being. So I just listed a bunch of stuff that I am, and I just want to note one thing that I am not is I am not a mental health professional. Um, the scope of cognitive behavioral therapy that we're going to be talking about only deals with using it within your ability to deal with imposter syndrome and for your own career development. If you want to use this type of therapy for other purposes, like for your own mental well being, I highly recommend reaching out to a professional and working through whatever scenario that works for you in, because this is not a one size fits all solution. Awesome. So, what is cognitive behavioral therapy? It's a large scientific term, and we're going to get, I'll share an Oxford Dictionary definition of it soon. But first, let me just show you what exactly it is by going through a session of CBT that I specifically have went through. So on screen now, you'll see one of my initial thoughts. This type of thought has been something that has happened to me before almost every single job I have started. Um, and it's something that's pretty common. So the thought is they give me the job. I don't understand why. I didn't actually finish the code challenge during the interview, and the person who interviewed me had to guide me through the process. So how am I going to manage to do this on the job on my own? They're going to find out that they made a mistake and they're going to fire me. So all this like spiraling into this final thought of they messed up, they shouldn't have hired me, and now I'm going to get fired, right? So, cognitive behavioral therapy deals with looking at these negative thoughts and figuring out what are called cognitive distortions. So, cognitive distortions are basically ways that your mind tricks you into thinking about things that aren't necessarily true. So, I'm going to pick out two cognitive distortions that I went through during this thought. The first one is called filtering, and the second one is called catastrophizing. So let's focus on filtering first. Filtering is about removing all of the positive information and focusing only on the negative ones. So if we go back to my initial thought, I'm talking about all of these things that went wrong in the interview and completely ignoring the fact that I got a job, that they hired me, that this still turned out okay. You know, all of this other stuff that happened and whatever may happen on the job, there will be time to go over it. There will be time to, if there's different resources that I might need, there'll be more available to me, rather than within this time setting, I'll have more time to actually do all this stuff when I'm on the job. So that's all filtering. And the last thing is catastrophizing, which is exaggerating an event to an absolute worst case scenario. And that's where my thought finally ended up in, right? So they'll find out that they made a mistake and they're going to fire me. Just like this is what's going to happen. Everything's going wrong. And the final result is just going to be I'm going to get fired from my job. So, again, thinking back on the things that I was already sort of templating for myself, I saw that, I'm filtering, I'm removing all the good things. So, what I need to do now for the final piece of cognitive behavioral therapy is to challenge my thoughts in some way. So the cognitive distortions are really there for you to understand what's going on and how you can actually go in and say, okay, um, this is why I'm thinking this way. Is there something I can reach out to that shows that maybe I'm wrong? So the first thing, like I mentioned before, I got the job, I secured the bag, I got that money. It's great, you know? In the real world, I'm going to have more time and resources that I did not have in the interview. In the interview, there's a time limit. I didn't really have enough time to actually scope out the problem and understand what I'm doing. In the real world, I'm probably going to sit down, look through what the issues are, figure out what I need to do, and before I even like go in and tackle the problem, I'll already have a plan on how to do it. You know, and they had to have liked something about me in order to hire me. Maybe they like my logical reasoning. Maybe they like the way that I went through the different problems that they gave me. And a funny thing about, really an honestly funny thing about imposter syndrome is, you know, if you're quote unquote right and they hired you for, they were wrong about hiring you, then you must be just amazing because you tricked a bunch of professionals into thinking that you can do something that you can't, which probably is not the case. So at the end of the day, you got hired for a reason. They liked the things that you did. And these are things to keep in mind as you're going through and challenging your thoughts on imposter syndrome. So this is the little definition I promised earlier. So cognitive behavioral therapy is a type of psychotherapy in which negative patterns of thought about the self and the world are challenged in order to alter unwanted behavior patterns or treat mood disorders such as depression. And like I said, in the context of this specific talk, we're really just going about how to use CBT within the realm of imposter syndrome and improving your career. Everything else is out of scope for this conversation and should be spoken with a mental health professional about that. Awesome. So there are a bunch of cognitive distortions. I just placed a few right now here on the screen. These are ones that I personally go through quite a bit, and I'll go through a little bit on what they mean and some examples of them. So the first one is always being right. I unfortunately have a tendency to while I won't always say it out loud, I will say, no, I'm always right. I know what I'm doing. I don't want to listen to this other person or whatever. And that can lead to a lot of negative thoughts for yourself. And it's always, important to keep up an open mind. It is one of the cognitive distortions that this type of therapy asks you to challenge. Another one is jumping to conclusions, which I hope is a little bit more self-explanatory. It's basically like assuming, another person is feeling or thinking about something without actually understanding the full context. Like, my boss sent me a Slack message. Oh my God, I'm getting fired. Also, if you are a manager, please don't just send someone a Slack message saying we need to talk. Next thing would be polarized thinking. This is essentially also called binary thinking, the tendency to view things as like black and white. People are either good coders or they're not. There's no in the middle. There's no learning coder, which there is. You're always improving. There's no such thing as just good or bad. Next is the fallacy of change, which means, I think as long as I push someone to change, they will change. Things take actions, things take a little bit of work. Simply saying to change is not going to make something change. Overgeneralization is taking like one example of something and turning it into an unchangeable pattern. So it's like, yeah, my presentation didn't go well. They're all gonna go poorly. Something like that. And then shoulds, which I think are super common that we all kind of face almost every single day, is I should have done this. I should have worked on that bug earlier so that prod wouldn't have broken or whatever it is. And I think instead of like focusing on the shoulds, we should like flip that into a could. What can we do in the future to make sure that this doesn't happen again, right? So these are some common cognitive distortions that I've been facing. Maybe you faced a lot of these too. You can definitely look up more of these. And as you're, if you're applying cognitive behavioral therapy to your career, it's definitely things that you should take a look at. So going back to this whole imposter syndrome thing that we all kind of face. Now, when we're using CBT to actually combat imposter syndrome, it can be hard to sort of find those things that is going to help you to actually combat these thoughts, right? How do I remember that, I did something well or did something that might help me get out of this funk? Because, like, when I'm in that actual position, I might just be feeling kind of crappy. I might not, know how to actually challenge these thoughts. And one thing that's kind of helped me a lot is reaching for wins and just recording almost like a database of wins for myself. So, one thing that I did personally was I went on Twitter. I pinned this tweet of like different accomplishments that I've been doing, of like different things that I've done over the past couple months, and mainly this year, really. So, it might be, things that I've done for my startup, building up a startup, the different achievements that we've created there. It might be certain talks I've delivered. Maybe I've been on a podcast. Maybe I solved some type of issue or bug at work, or any type of win. And I just kept adding it over and over and over onto this thread. And it's just a thread that I go back to from time to time when I'm feeling a little bit down or feeling these thoughts of imposter syndrome. And I'm able to like pick out certain things that might be helpful for when I'm going through these thoughts, through any of these negative thoughts. One thing to note is that while I did this in public, you don't necessarily have to. It's not a requirement whatsoever to do this in public. I'm a very big advocate of like learning or building in public, but this type of thing, you should be doing it for you, not for anyone else, and not for any type of social proof or social progression or whatever. It can be awesome for that type of thing, but it's not a requirement to actually get the full benefits of this. Because at the end of the day, we're really just trying to figure out how to deal with our thoughts, figure out how to deal with our career progression and things like that. And it doesn't have to be public if you don't want it to be. One other thing to remember about these wins, they're wins even if they are small. So, an example that I like to go back on is that when I was first learning how to code, went to my boot camp and everything, one of the first things that I said to myself was like, yeah, I just made this thing, this hello world thing, right? And it's nothing. Like when I think back on it now, I'm just like, yeah, this is nothing. But before, like a week before this, I had never touched code. I had never done anything else. And then I just kept going and writing down different things that I did. First I did the hello world. Now I can make a web page. Now I can, add more interactivity with JavaScript. Now I can like spin up a React app and create, different things or whatever it is. Now I can use CMSs or whatever, and actually create more complex applications. These wins in the moment seem small, but they compound into something bigger. When you can look back on every single one of these wins, it's just like, wow, I did a lot of things. And while in the moment they seem very small, when you look at them all together, it's huge. And small wins in like this huge quantity can be way more impactful than some large single big win. Now, as I was kind of going through this, I had a very unintended but very welcome side effect. And this is all about mapping your wins for interviews and performance reviews. So I started cognitive behavioral therapy really mainly for myself, as someone who, goes through depression, goes through um, a bunch of different mental illnesses. It was very helpful for me. But then when I applied this to my career and realized that looking at these wins, recording them, and actually making this timeline for myself of different things I've accomplished, it gave me a lot of stories for both interviews and for promotion reviews. And while, you know, going back to the whole learning in public thing, like, if you're comfortable with that, that's awesome. You can use that, for leverage in, standing out in job applications or performance reviews and things like that. And, but you don't need to do that in public to get this full benefit either. Because once I started tracking all this for myself, I had three awesome stories that really helped me over the past few months as I was interviewing for like my second job in tech, as I was, building up, my startup and everything like that. So these are three stories that I found like for myself that helped me a lot in interviews. One is like the things that I learned by having no idea how to be a co-founder. So all of the different um, lessons, harsh, some awesome things that I learned while trying to build my startup helped me talk a lot about different trade-offs, different decisions that I made while building out certain things for interviews, and really helped me with, starting those conversations and having very interesting conversations with people who were interviewing me for jobs. The next one was figuring out the progression that I made as a software engineer. One really cool thing you can do with your imposter syndrome is like you look at something that you thought you couldn't do, you felt like you weren't gonna accomplish, and then looking at your wins and then figuring out how to actually apply that in a way to get through your imposter syndrome and show that progression to interviewers. That is super powerful. Just like showing your progression, saying, hey, I couldn't do this unit test at first. And then I remembered all these other accomplishments I made. And then I took little pieces from each of them. And this is how I solved this issue. I, thought I couldn't create more complex applications. And then all of a sudden I learned X technology or Y technology. And those wins helped me compound together a way for me to get over this other fear that I had. Like, these are awesome things to tell interviewers, stuff that I found very, awesome. And this is helpful for wherever you are in your career, whether you're in the beginning of it, whether you're, several years in. All of this is very helpful. And overall, at the end of the day, the stories that you're building are your own stories. Sometimes you don't need to share them. Sometimes they're just for you. So finding my wins when I was feeling down from imposter syndrome was the biggest thing that I was able to get from this, and one of the biggest stories that I could be able to share with others, specifically, through this presentation and other things. It's just these are the things that have been helpful just by doing applying this type of therapy to my overall career. And sometimes at the end of the day, we need to explore the deeper reasoning behind our actual imposter syndrome. What's causing it? You know, is it that I feel like I'm not prepared? Maybe I need to go and learn other things, get wins from there, and compound those and like figure out a way to, you know, prepare myself a little bit more. Maybe it doesn't have to be a specific overall thing that you're doing for someone else, like for a job interview, but some we always like put arbitrary sort of rules on ourselves, and sometimes we just need to overcome those in some way. So looking at that deeper meaning, figuring out how to overcome them, CBT is super helpful overall for that. Now, I wanted to go through one more CBT experiment that I did with myself. This is something that happened during my time at my first job. So my initial thought here was, I suck at writing unit tests. I'm probably not going to be in a position where I can ever be considered to be much more than a decent junior developer. I'm just going to be stuck at this level. What's the point of trying sometimes? And I'm sure people have had some variation of this thought throughout their career, whether they're writing unit tests or trying to figure out how to, get a couple of technologies to work well together or whatever it is. And the cognitive distortions that I identified for myself in these were polarized thinking and overgeneralization. So polarized thinking, the whole binary thinking, viewing life as black and white. Um, if I look back here, I just thought, if I can't write unit tests, I'm just not going to be a good developer, and that was the end of the story. But there's much bigger nuance there. Like, what can I do to improve myself to actually go out and learn how to write better unit tests? How can I get that actual experience to make sure that I am not stuck as a junior dev forever? The other thing is overgeneralization, taking one example, generalizing it into an unchangeable pattern. And that again applies to this as well, because now I'm saying, this unchangeable pattern of just me being a junior developer who is never going to improve. So how do I go ahead and challenge these type of thoughts? So I acknowledge that I needed help at this moment, but I can learn and do better next time. I can take these experiences and get help from more senior developers. I can learn from their experiences, and from their experiences and my own experiences, I can take those and evolve. you know in this specific um, sort of issue, I had spoken to my team lead, and he introduced like the whole theory of rubber duck debugging. And now I have on my desk a pop figure of Vegeta from Dragon Ball Z, who I use as a rubber duck. And if the Prince of All Saiyans can't help me debug my code, that's when I realize, okay, maybe I need additional help. And I need to use that as a learning experience to give myself the ability to go through these, harsher issues until I can learn them. And then next time I've already gone through it, now I know what I'm doing. I can become a senior dev because I've gone through these issues before and have patterns or understand ways to go around them. So some final thoughts that I wanted to share. I wanted to share like one more story, um, just to like fully cement the fact that imposter syndrome happens at any point in your career. Um, at my first job at American Express, one of my one of the directors of technology had seen like a tweet that I had made about how I was really feeling a lot of imposter syndrome, and he took me to the side and he showed me how he and another director had just sort of like read the GraphQL spec, and now we're trying to implement a whole design where our backend would be using GraphQL and migrating our APIs and things like that. And he's like, "Look, all we did was read a document. We have no idea what we're doing. We're just kind of throwing things against the wall, hoping for the best." And these are guys that are kind of like 10 years into their 10 or more years into their career. They still feel the imposter syndrome. It's still there, but we have to kind of like learn how to deal with it, how to get through it, how to overcome it, right, at the end of the day. And I'm hoping that maybe something from this will help you kind of deal with those thoughts, because it is something that's super common. So many developers have this thought every single day, and it's something that we can overcome. And like I said before, if you want to follow me, I am mainly available on Twitter at Rahat Codes, or on my startup at Whimser.io. Thank you very much for attending my talk, and I hope you gained something out of it.